Okay, we're going to do another story from Robert Whiting's Japan. This one is about fake Gaijin, or Gaijin is a word for foreigner. So, a Japanese person in this case who poses as a Westerner. The title of this is Fake Gaijin spun quite a tale back in the day. Bob Whiting published this March 26, 2022, and you can find it on robertwhiting.substack.com. Tokyo. Japanese journalist Hiroshi Kubo, author of a book entitled Sagishi No Subete, all about scam artists, in discussing differences between Japan and the West, wrote, "The tendency to be preyed upon is part of Japan's beautiful and traditional culture. In Japan, if a friend introduces you to an acquaintance, even if that acquaintance is a relative stranger to your friend, you will automatically trust that person, regardless of his family, blood, or educational background, because it would be regarded as rude to do otherwise. That's part of the Japanese culture." Moreover, there's another difference. As book editor Noriko Matsunaga put it, the Japanese are considerably more reluctant than Americans and Europeans to admit they had been victimized by a con artist. It's considered a shameful, embarrassing thing. Most people would rather suffer their losses in silence than try to bring the perpetrator to justice. Enter Takashi Soma, one of the more colorful examples of Japanese con artistry. A pure-blooded Japanese, born and raised in Japan, he spent a significant part of his adult life posing as an American jet fighter pilot. Soma was a short, dark-complexioned, curly-haired Japanese Okinawan who had once visited the airstrip at Kadena Air Base during the base's annual weekend open house, where he was allowed to sit in the cockpit of an F-4 United States Air Force fighter plane, don a pilot's helmet, and have his photograph taken. He had a phony ID made up to go along with the photo, which bore a facial shot alongside a fictitious rank and serial number. He then moved to Tokyo, where he began his great deception, hanging out at the Oak Bar in the Imperial Hotel, a popular end-of-the-day hangout for well-to-do, internationally minded Japanese. He told fellow patrons of his very special profession. He also managed to make up a phony U.S. Air Force ID, which bore his picture alongside a fictitious rank and serial number. In time, he moved to Tokyo, where he began showing people his ID card and telling them he was a graduate of the elite United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, and that he was a former United States Air Force captain and an F-4 fighter pilot and Vietnam War veteran, now serving in the U.S. Military Reserve, and that he was a dual citizen of Japan and the U.S., the only Japanese native to achieve these lofty heights, he would add. If people did not believe him, which was quite often the case, he would produce his ID and the photograph of him sitting in the F-4. "That's me," he would say with all the pride he could muster. "When I was in Vietnam." The photo was taken at a forward base. Soma also possessed a fake American passport. Okay, most Japanese were highly impressed. They swallowed the story, unaware that the U.S. did not allow dual citizenship. Moreover, few Japanese realized that Soma could not speak English very well either. He could communicate all right, but he mixed up his L's and R's and his V's and B's, and he jumbled his syntax and reversed his sentence order as well. Fortunately for Soma, the level of English language education in Japan was so abysmal that hardly anyone he came into contact with was fluent enough to spot these defects. The clientele at the Oak Room were the type of people who were breaking down the door to do business in the West, and they had a great need for foreign men and women to help them in their quest, which is why they listened when Soma talked about his education at West Point, considered one of America's finest educational institutions, and delivered a line of patter about how much money he was going to make for himself and anyone else who hooked up with him. On occasion, for effect, he would show up in his U.S. Air Force uniform with the captain's bars on it. Now, actually, Soma lived in a tiny, dark, so-called rabbit hutch apartment in his 1.5 LDK in the parlance in Tokyo's residential area of Azabu, along with his young wife, whom he had acquired since his move to Tokyo, and his two small children. His apartment, as one visitor put it, was a dump. Its one notable feature, a big enlarged photo on the wall of himself sitting in the F4. Soma's wife was a daughter of a well-known artist, a man who would eventually grow wise to the character traits of his son-in-law and disown him. The daughter, perhaps out of a sense of loyalty or a sense of fatalism, stayed with her husband. At one point, though, his wife's family's contacts, Soma managed to tie up with a shipping company that was almost bankrupt. The company had dismissed almost all its employees and was trying to figure out what to do with the 3 cargo ships it had left. Soma had convinced the chairman of the company that he could somehow save things and that he, with his international contacts, could find buyers for the 3 remaining ships and use that money to get the company out of the red. He persuaded the chairman to pay him a salary and let him use the firm's Ginza office, a cavernous open room on the 7th floor of a big office building, still stocked with some 80 desks, assorted phones, and copying machines. There he ensconced himself at a desk, trying to think of ways to utilize his new surroundings to drum up some business. He also installs a pair of Americans there he had hired for 75,000 yen a month to sit there and do whatever they liked for a few hours each day for the sole purpose of demonstrating to visitors what a globally minded executive he was, and perhaps to remind people that he himself was an American citizen. He would introduce them to visitors as important businessmen from the U.S., although they were in reality a couple of Gaijin drifters in Tokyo, looking to make their mark, or at least some easy money, without having to undertake the boring task of teaching English. His American employees could not help noticing that he spoke English like some rough-and-tumble bartender at an off-base GI bar, but he paid them reasonably well for doing absolutely nothing, gave them office space that they would otherwise have to pay for, and allowed them to pursue other work like freelance copy editing, which was how both men ordinarily made their living. Everything proceeded smoothly for a while until Soma made the mistake of asking them to help him acquire a new ID, and that proved to be his undoing. From now on, he said, I want to be a GS with a high rating. GS means government service and refers to civilians working for the U.S. government. I'll give you 1 million yen if you can get me a new ID card. The Americans went to visit a civilian butcher in the mess at Grant Heights Base in Nerima, who was selling meat on the black market as a side business, and who, in the grand tradition of entrepreneurial American crooks in Japan, said he had figured out how to manufacture fake IDs as well. The price would be 250,000 yen. The card was produced and delivered. Everybody was happy. Soma had not noticed that the ID card was dyed the wrong color, a deep shade of blue instead of green. To make a long story short, the civilian butcher was caught in the act of selling ID cards to another party. He was arrested, court-martialed, and sent back to the States. The Americans, afraid they might have been implicated as well by the butcher, disappeared. Shortly after that, Soma disappeared from Tokyo. Nobody knew where he had gone or why. Acquaintances could only assume it had something to do with his false identity. It was only several years ago that one of the Americans who knew him, Rick Roa, unexpectedly ran into him. Interested in buying precious gems, the American had answered an ad in the Japan Times and traveled to a small town outside Tokyo to meet the prospective seller. Taking a cab from the station as instructed, he arrived in an old rundown shack in the middle of a forest. There, waiting for him at the door, was a disheveled, balding Mr. Soma. And on the wall inside the shack was a fading photo of Mr. S in the cockpit of the F4. And that is the end of the story. I think I'll put the screenshot. Actually, the photo we have in the article is, that's a Navy plane, but maybe I can get a shot of an F4 in the day. Anyways, that's all for now. If you like this and you want more, please like, subscribe, and you can put any requests in the comments. There are stories behind a paywall on Robert Whiting's Substack. Again, that's robertwhiting.substack.com. And if you have any requests, let me know through the comments. Thank you.